Hello, and welcome to Actifio's Masterclass webinar series. Our session today is the Daily Actifio Administration, keeping your Actifio deployment healthy in 10 minutes a day. There's just a few short notes that I'd like to cover before we begin. My name is Paul Martell, and our next customer webinar is How Actifio Makes Oracle DBA's Lives Easier. It will be held on April 25th. And we also have a live remote SKY administration class that's scheduled for March 12th. If you'd like to get information about that or attend that, you can see that in the Actifio Now customer portal. Today's presenter is David Fowler. David is the manager of our global enablement. And like I said, he'll be taking you through the lesson today, and I'll be sitting in the background managing the question queue. Dave, take it away.
Thank you, Paul. And thanks everybody for joining us for today's presentation of keeping your Actifio environment healthy in just 10 minutes a day. Today we're going to break things down into three sections, which are three vital areas where we can spend just a couple minutes a day. We can see everything that's going on in our environment. We can forecast what's going to be going on in a week or a month as soon as tomorrow. And we can leverage all of this monitoring to be proactive for capacity issues, misconfigured SLAs, and using all of this monitoring and all this aggregation of data, we can improve the throughput of our Actifio solution by increasing the amount of jobs through smarter SLA design. We can save time in managing our Actifio solution by knowing exactly where these key points are to look at. And we can save money in the Actifio solution. And we can do that by properly forecasting the amount of storage that we need, by looking at how we're consuming storage to make sure that our consumption actually matches our intent. And we'll get into each of these topics at a more granular level as we go through this over the next hour. So we're going to start off with Actifio Report Manager. I've recently found out that about 40% of our users are not using the Actifio Report Manager. If you happen to be part of that 40% and you're here with our webinar today, I would strongly urge you to open a support ticket with our support department right after the webinar and engage them on what we need to do to get Report Manager installed in your environment. It's a great tool, and I personally believe that it's absolutely essential to the daily administration of your Actifio solution. The Report Manager does offer information that you can find in other places, such as CLI queries, Sarge queries, API calls. However, there is nothing else that's going to aggregate all of this data and present it to you in a valuable way that you can leverage right now. We're also going to get into some of the Actifio alerting. We'll cover some SNMP traps, how to deal with these alerts. And we'll also get into some of those command line, Sarge, CLI, and API queries I referenced a little bit earlier. And we'll also go a bit into how we can use this command line. Maybe you don't want to type these commands on the command line on a daily basis. However, perhaps you have a solution like SolarWinds or ServiceNow, and these integrate seamlessly with our REST API, and you can leverage those for not only monitoring, but automation as well. So Report Manager, what is it? It's a VM-based appliance. You can run it in either VMware or Hyper-V. It provides monitoring for your Actifio CDS or SKY environment. Now you can monitor 1, you can monitor 30, you can monitor 50. If you had separate organizations in your company and you wanted to have one instance of Report Manager watching half, we'll say 10, and another instance watching another 10, we could do that as well. It's a browser-based UI, so anywhere where you can connect to your network and you've got good routing to get from the machine that you've opened the browser on to your Actifio environment, you can access all of this information. It doesn't require a special installer. Once you've got the Report Manager installed in the VM, any place you can access your environment via a web browser, you can get all this information. Now, even more importantly, and this is how we kind of trim down into 10 minutes a day, is we can pre-select some reports and we can have them automatically run and mailed to us every single day. So ostensibly, we actually, once we've set it up, we don't even need to look at Report Manager. We can just rely on those scheduled reports. We can open up our email, see what it has to tell us. If we see something that's maybe confusing or interesting, or we want to dig in, we can obviously do a deep dive into Report Manager to see exactly what's going on. But just as far as a quick daily administration, we can have those reports mailed. You don't even need to log in. And so what does it do? Okay, well, we just kind of talked about what it does, but what does it do that matters to you? How is it going to save you time? How is it going to save you money? How is it going to make your life better? So how does it save us time? It allows us to monitor all Actifio appliances in a single UI. Now, anybody who's used our desktop client can understand maybe some of the frustration that could come along with having to open 50 different CDS or Sky desktops to take a look and see what's going on. And that's, I really think, where Report Manager, for a quick at a glance what's going on in my system, is an incredible tool, simply because it avoids having to open all of those desktop instances. You can see it all reflected right in front of you. It saves you time by allowing you to create reports one time and then set them up to be mailed to you every single day in perpetuity. Again, I just mentioned, once we've got those reports set up, if there's nothing really interesting, we're not onboarding new apps, we're not trying to figure out why something unexpected happens, you really don't even have to log into Report Manager. You just set these reports up and just let them go. It can also save you time if you have some reporting you need to do on your environment. We all have bosses, we all have management and directors and executives. And it's not uncommon for these folks to want to know how the environment's being managed. How much storage are we using? Are we consuming 60%? Are we at 80% in that sweet spot? Have we gone over to 90? And a lot of times it's the Actifio administration team, which generally is going to be some mix of a sysadmin and a network team. They need to then report to their leadership teams on all of these questions, all these metrics, and provide some analytics. Well, you don't need to make these reports anymore. You can actually set up these reports, set them to be automatically run, and you could just put the members of the leadership team who are looking for this sort of analysis and metrics, you could just have these reports automatically mailed to them. So once you've created just the right report that satisfies all of your reporting requirements, you could just automate it. You only ever have to do it once. Now, if the UI version doesn't work for you, maybe you've got some third-party software, maybe you're an MSP, maybe you're leasing part of your environment to another organization, and you need to extract that data from Report Manager and present it in a spreadsheet. Maybe you need to do some of your own analytics. Maybe you're running some billing metrics against some of the different organizational storage usage. You could export all of these reports as CSVs. You could use them in Google Sheets, Excel, Oracle, SQL databases, whatever works for you. Now, what else does Report Manager do? It's going to save us some money. And this is really, I think, one of the most valuable parts of Report Manager. So we have reports on snapshot and dedupe pool consumption. We also do vDisk resource consumption. And the best part is we do resource forecasting. And I'm going to show you examples of all these things that I've just talked about in this slide as we go on. The resource forecasting is invaluable. We actually do some of the trend analysis and forecasting projection of storage use. We actually put a nice trend line right on the screen so you can actually see where that trend line intersects your storage capacity, and you'll know exactly when you're going to be out of disk. As we all know, it's cheaper to prevent an issue than it is to fix an issue. So if we know today we're going to need disks in 2 months, let's just go ahead and get them ordered. Because if we wait that 2 months and we run out of physical disk or vDisks and now we can't snap or we can't restore, now we're in fire drill mode, and those are very, very expensive. The resources from different leadership teams that have to get involved, obviously the expeditious delivery of more storage, all of these things have a premium price tag on them. And we can avoid that entire situation by just looking at some of this forecasting a month or two ahead of time and just making sure we plan properly and we never actually hit that point of storage contention. Now here's the protection status report probably one of the more useful reports here in Report Manager, SLA Violation Summary and Detail Report. Now, what this is going to tell you is the total amount of failed jobs across the entire environment. It'll tell you why they failed. And it'll also tell you which host and which cluster it's on. So if you've got 30 CDSs and you had 15 SLA violations on CDS number 2, it'll say you had 15 SLA violations on CDS number 2. And those violations were on these hosts and on these applications. Now, as you can see, this is it's a good looking chart. It covers everything, but we probably want to get a little bit more granular if we are seeing some of those violations. And so we've got the SLA violation detail report. Very similar. The other one is the SLA violation summary. This is SLA violation detail. And this is where we actually do a little bit more of a deep dive, and we'll actually start to see some error codes. So on the far left, that whole column is which appliance it was on. Now that's which CDS or Sky instance the SLA violation occurred on. The next column over is the host and application. So if you have, say, a SQL host, named SQL host, but on that SQL host you have 4 SQL instances, it will tell you it was these 4 instances that had the violation. They lived on this host. That host is protected by this CDS, and it all happened on this date and this time, and here's your error message. Now, this is a great place to catch misconfigurations, and it's also a great place to look for trends. So if you had expirations disabled, and you were failing expiration jobs, it would say, hey, you had 14 SLA violations for image expiration. That's images that have gone beyond the retention date and should be cleared. But you had expirations off. So it'll tell you these 15 failed, and they failed because your expirations were shut off. Or these 7 snap jobs didn't run, and they didn't run because the scheduler for this particular policy has been disabled. So lots of great little information like that. But then it also has the more, we'll say, meaty technical details. So the Actifio connector failed to create VSS snapshot. Those error messages that you're going to see in your UI, or that are going to be caught by your trap receiver, that same syntax is all going to be here. And there's a unification of all of these error messages through every place that we report them. So if you see them in email, if you see them in your UI, if you see them in this report, they're all going to use the same verbiage. And we do that so if you're trying to look up some information on this error, if you're in our knowledge base or our document set, that it's consistent language through every repository of information that we've got. So you're not going to look at an error on this screen and then look at it in your UI and then be misled because we've changed the wording. It's all going to be uniform. So when you do your search in our federated search engine, it will then go through, it'll look at all of our KB articles, it'll look at all of the documents, and those KBs and docs all use the exact same verbiage that you're going to see in these reports and in the UI, which makes these errors copy-paste searchable, which is really what we were going for. The next really great at-a-glance report is going to be the daily protection status. Now, I can look at this report and I don't necessarily need to know really much of anything. It's very intuitive. We look and we see green, we're going to assume that's good, and we're right. And we use the standard green, yellow, red schema. And again, you don't need to be an expert in Actifio to understand that when you see red on a report, something's not right. Now, just to touch on this really quick, and I'm going to provide you with a much more in-depth resource for Report Manager once we start to exit this section of this webinar. But I did want to point these things out to you, as I do think they're some of the more useful components of Report Manager for daily administration. So if we look at this report, we can see things generally look okay. We've got a lot of green. We've got that series of red at the bottom, though. And that's telling. Something happened on this date here, where we see our first red dot. And that's both useful and interesting. It lets us know exactly where we need to go to start to look to figure out what went wrong. It lets us know that something on that day probably changed and didn't revert back, because we can see the jobs didn't start working again. They continued to fail. And then we can do a more deep dive into either that operation, why our snapshot's not working, why is dedupe not working, or if it's just one particular op on a particular app, we can look in, for example, in the example that I have on the screen, this is one particular host and application, and it's failing all jobs. All snapshots, all dedupe, all remote dedupe is failing. We probably have an offline host. But we'd really want to dig into that to really make any conclusion. But the point is we can just take a quick look at this. And once we're done with our implementation, we've done kind of our testing, our IOQ, everything should be working. When this report gets mailed to me in the morning, it should just be green, maybe a couple points of yellow. And just to cover the yellow so you know what it means, that means the job has not completed yet, but it still has a chance to finish within the window. So maybe we check the report at 2:30 in the morning and the dedupe window is still open. We've still got another 90 minutes before we want to start switching over into snap mode to do our business for the day. So we could see that some of this report is actually showing some yellow because those jobs are either in progress or they're scheduled and still have time to run within the allotted window. Now, these are some of my favorite reports. Anybody who's attended one of my webinars before knows that I'm absolutely in love with trend lines. Really one of my favorite things to see. So we've got two reports here, also available via Report Manager, also schedulable, so you can get these every morning if you want. Now, you probably don't need storage every morning. I would personally probably do it about once a week. I wouldn't go much longer than that, especially if you've got a more dynamic environment. You're constantly onboarding new apps. Maybe you're very heavy into test and dev, so you've got a lot of mounts going in and out, a lot of things that really cause storage pools to fluctuate. You might want to go every day, every 72 hours. If you're in more of a data protection type model, once a week should be sufficient. So we've got the storage resource trending report. I love this so much because of this trend line. As you can see on the screen, we've got our blue line that moves across, and that indicates our capacity. You can see that that does creep up a little bit. We've added some physical disks to this pool, so the capacity has increased. The green is the actual consumed. So if we saw some weird patterns there, that would clue us in that maybe things are not configured the way that we'd hoped. Maybe we have a bunch of applications that should be in a consistency group, but they're not. Perhaps we're running full backups when we intend to be running incrementals. Perhaps we discovered a vCenter and accidentally protected every single VM when we really only meant to do about 30% of them. So this graph here could give you hints that something is not right in this sort of situation. If we see the storage consumption skyrocket right to capacity overnight, something maybe got misconfigured. But the real valuable part here is the trend line. It'll tell you, so long as you stay more or less in the same pattern of behavior that you're in now, it'll tell you exactly when you're gonna run out of storage. As we can see here on the graph, we can see our blue capacity line here, and we can see our trend line. Now this trend line comes from Report Manager. Report Manager does all the math. You don't even have to think about this one. All you have to do is run the report, and we'll provide all of this for you. And all we do is we look at our capacity line, we look at our trend line. Where those two lines intersect, that is the day that we run out of storage. Now, clearly don't plan to replace or add disk the day before, but just use this to make well-informed decisions. In this particular example, we're going to run out of storage sometime around the end of December. So let's get some more disk in the beginning of that quarter. We don't even have to add it to pools. We could just zone the disk in, that is, make the physical storage available to the CDS or Sky appliance, and we can just leave it there as unmanaged. Perhaps we are hosting at an MSP, and so we're paying every month for how much disk we're actually writing to. We can put those disks in and leave them idle, not pay for any sort of IO to them, and then once we hit that December kind of getting close to being full date, we just then put them into pools, and now we'll start writing to them, and now you'll be billed for them. But the point is they were there before we needed them, and we weren't paying for them because we didn't have them as part of a pool. They were just sitting to the side. They were waiting to be assigned. Now you can add these pools through your UI. You can call our support department. We can help you out. But the point is we had the storage available before we needed it, and it didn't cost us any money. Now, the next one is the disk pool utilization history. And this actually provides some of the information where we do our trend analysis and forecasting from. And now this strictly talks about just pool capacity versus consumption. The nice part about this, though, is there's a drop-down list, and every cluster that we know about, that is every Actifio CDS or Sky appliance that we know about via this report manager, we can report on at the same time. So let's go back to that 50 different CDSs, 25 in each site. We don't want to open all those UIs. We don't want to run a report pools times 50 times at the command line to see what's going on. We can just set this report up to say, let me know about the pools, and you can select either the snap pool or the dedupe pool or a remote pool, all of them or none of them. You can select a subset of your appliances or all of them, but the important part being, rather than spending an hour trying to figure out where your storage capacity and consumption is at times 50 different appliances, we're going to put it all into one report. We're going to set that report to run automatically every day, and we just saved ourselves 2 hours. Every day we come into the office, we've got an emailed report, tells us exactly where everything's at. We look at our trend lines, takes me about 90 seconds. Okay, everything is in the green. I'm looking at the trend line. It looks like I've got at least another 90 days. I don't need to worry about that today. And we're done. We're moving on. We're back onto our regular day job. And now vDisk consumption. You can't really talk about storage pools. You can't really talk about resources without also talking about vDisks. vDisks are a finite resource. We use them primarily in the snap pool. We do use them a little bit in dedupe. Dedupe is actually just one really big vDisk. But more importantly, the snap pool, these vDisks, these are the logical resources that are going to host mounts, incremental data. These are going to be staging disks. And so you obviously need to track the use of these. As of the time of this webinar, the average trigger is at about 1,850 vDisks consumed. Now, I'm being very specific about my language because we have recently released some new Sky licenses. And those newer versions of Sky, actually, they have more than 2,000 vDisks. And depending on how you license it, that number could vary a little bit. So we'll just stick with more. And regardless of what that more ends up being, whether you license 5,000, 10,000, 100,000, we don't actually sell 100,000. It's important to know how we're using these, because if we get into a pinch, if we need to do a restore, or if we need to mount out data, maybe we have a host that goes down, no problem. We can mount your application as a VM. We'll bring you right back online, but we're going to need a vDisk to do that. Now, this report, the application contribution to cumulative vDisk usage, aka the vDisk report, will also show you usage over time, and it makes an interesting differentiation. Now, on the screen here, in the example that I've got, you can see everything is shown in orange. And we can see where we were a little bit high, and then we came down. We put some things into a consistency group, reducing the amount of vDisks being used. But more importantly, if we had onboarded new apps, we would see that vDisk use in white. Why do I care about that? Well, let's back up a little bit to we discovered a new vCenter, and we accidentally protected every VM on the vCenter. We come into work the next morning, we've got alerts saying that we're out of vDisks, our snap pool's full. What happened? What's good? Everything was working great when I went home yesterday. Now I'm coming in the morning and I've got nothing but alerts and emails here. We can pop over here to trace down, what happened? Why did we go from, we'll say, nominal 900 to 1,100 vDisk use day over day, and now I'm out. The 1850 was at 3 o'clock in the morning. It's 6 o'clock now. I've got none. I'm using 1,995 and I've only got 2,000 at the absolute most. Well, I can look at this report and I can see that, okay, well, 1,100 of them are being used by these old applications. I can see it. It's in orange. It's the same trend line I've been looking at for the last 3 months. But then we see the spike, and that spike is in white. And we know that all of the vDisks that are represented by the white line are from new applications. New is defined by anything less than 24 hours old. So when we see that, we go, oh, something happened last night. This was fine. For some reason last night, we decided that we were going to use up another 900, 1100 vDisks, consuming them all. And again, this would require a more in-depth, kind of deeper dive to really troubleshoot it and get it resolved. However, just as a quick at a glance, let's see what's going on in my environment. Something's not right, and I need a real quick impression of where I need to start looking to see where things didn't play out the way I wanted them to. This is a great report for any sort of vDisk contention, alerts, issues, or just concerns. Maybe you just want to make sure that maybe you set up a business practice. We will never be consuming more than 1,600 vDisks. We want to make sure we've always got 250 for emergency mounts, restores, onboarding new apps. You can use this report here, and you can actually set some parameters to let you know, hey, you've gone to 1,700, and you said to let you know when you went over 1,600. So we can set up some triggers. So again, we can actually, even though we don't even have to log into Report Manager for this report because we can automate it and it'll just get emailed to us, we can leverage even more of these tools to say, you know what, don't even send me this report unless I'm using over 1,400. And in that way, we're gonna kind of reduce that pile of things that we need to look at in the morning. And again, this is Actifio administration in 10 minutes a day, right? So the more we can automate, the more we can reduce and just really boil down to what we care about. Just one little bit of information we can fit in the palm of our hand and we can really understand it in the first 10 minutes that we walk in every day. That's really the goal here. So while we can automate all these reports, there might be the urge to, well, let's automate tons of reports. You know, let's set all these things up and every morning I'll come in and I'll have 55 reports. You're gonna need a lot more than 10 minutes to get through those. And I'm not saying don't run all these reports. If you, like I said, if you are an MSP, you're leasing this out to somebody else, maybe you've got departmental budgets, this team can only use this much storage, that team can only use that much, and you really need to audit it. All of this is here. We can really deep dive. We can look in right down to how much MDL and storage each app, each host, everything's using. But as far as just keeping things healthy on a day-to-day basis, this is the report we want when we're looking at vDisks. And unless we're over some threshold, I think 1,600 is a pretty good number. You decide what works best for you. If it's not over that number, don't even send me the report. Let's reduce the work. Ideally, I'm gonna come in, I'm gonna spend 2 minutes, I'm gonna look at my reports. Things are green, the things that are not green, I expected to not be green. Everything was within spec. I'm not gonna run out of any resources in the next 90 days. And I'm not even done with my coffee, and all of my Actifio duties for the day are done. Now, this is the Actifio Report Manager overall summary. And this is, again, is great for anybody who has multiple appliances, anybody who would otherwise have to open up 6, 7, 8, 9 different instances of our desktop application. And this actually, I will say, if you are using AGM, AGM is a wonderful tool and brings the aggregation of control into a single browser-based solution and essentially does all of the same kind of connectivity that Report Manager does, but then adds in a control component, basically replaces your UI, which is great. So you could actually, with AGM, manage everything you've got in the entire world through one browser, and the next tab over, have Report Manager sitting right there, reporting on every appliance, every app, every host you've got globally. And these, again, these are just a quick at a glance, and these are actually just kind of aggregations of the reports that we've already covered, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time on them. I wanted to show you the more granular reports that we could have run. And those are, if I was trying to understand something a little bit better, I would definitely dig into those reports that we've already covered. Once we've reached a steady state, everything has been protected, we're in our incremental model, and we just need to do day-to-day operations. I'm actually going to say skip every report that I've talked about so far. Use them for a little while, get familiar with them, understand what they mean, understand what we look at, why we look at it, and why it matters, and how that matters to you in your deployment. But once you've really got your head around all that, the overall summary is great. It's going to show you your trending, your consumption, your usage over time, vDisks, dedupe, snap, and it's even going to show you your alerts all in one page. So that's everything that I just showed you, all in one page. Now, if that page comes up and you see something really weird, we'll say in the example on the screen here, we've got our snapshot pool up at the top, and you can see in the top right, you can see that trend line spikes. If we want to understand that a little bit better, we can just click that top right report and it'll open the full version of that report. We can then start setting parameters, we can start drilling down. But the point is we didn't have to look at the appliance, we didn't have to open a UI, we didn't have to run a report, we actually didn't even have to look at the trending report. All we needed was the overall summary. And from that overall summary, as you can see here, this is everything I really care about from one cluster, and it's all on one page. And of course, this report can be automated and scheduled as well. So maybe you just run this for every cluster every day. And if you see something that you didn't expect, then we can do a drill down into the consumption or use, or why isn't this clearing up? But everything that you're going to need is going to be clickable from this report. And then we can drill down, like I said, right down to which application on which host on which cluster had which problem at what time and why. Now I keep talking about scheduling reports. So I just want to do a quick show and tell on how to schedule them. And like I said before, at the end of each section, I'm going to give you some additional resources. I know I'm going pretty quickly through Report Manager. We've got some great content, some great documentation. Paul Martel did a wonderful webinar on how to do all these great different things with Report Manager. So at the end of every section, I'm going to be providing you a slide that has all of these resources on it. So don't worry if you feel like we're maybe moving a little bit quick. We are. But then I'm going to circle back and I'll make sure that you've got the full iterative version of all this information to consume at your leisure. So to schedule one of these reports that we were just talking about, we're going to pop open the Actifio Report Manager. We're going to open up the repository, then we're going to right click and click Schedule. When we right click Schedule, the scheduled job pages appear. Now you can schedule one report here, you can schedule 50, you can set them to run daily, weekly, monthly. You can have reports for one organization, runs once a week. Maybe that's an internal organization. You just need to make sure that team isn't using more of your storage than they should. Maybe you've got another team who's remote, who you are maybe providing application access as a service. And you don't necessarily want the stuff for the internal team and the stuff for this person who's kind of leasing the service from you to get mixed in, but you still want to automate these reports. We can make everything granular down to the org level. So we can say, just take the applications in this org and mail it to this list of people. And then take everything else and mail it to this other list of people. So once we've selected which reports we want, the frequency, we're going to click the Create Schedule button. You see it here in bright orange. And once we click that, the Scheduler tab is going to appear, and that's this screen here. Now, as you can see, we've got the schedule start date, generally going to be immediately. If you know that you're going to be onboarding a bunch of new SQL hosts in the next 90 days, and it's your job to do the reporting, you could actually set the report up ahead of time and just say, you know what, keep this in your back pocket, and in about 80 days from now, start running it every day. And you can configure all of that right here. So you can see the recurrence type down the bottom. I'm going to say generally you're going to want daily for the reports that we're talking about today for the purposes of daily administration. And then we can set the needed parameters. Now that's going to be which clusters do we want to report on, and that's generally going to be all. Again, for the context of what we're here talking about today, which is keeping the entire environment healthy, we really want to see that overall summary report for every cluster every single day. Now, what does actually every day mean? Every day means 3 a.m. until 3 a.m. And that's the cluster's time. So depending on what time zone offset you've got used, if you're in Colorado, you may be using Mountain Standard Time. So it will trigger at 3 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. If you have one of those crazy data centers that has customers from all over the world and you've got their cluster, maybe the data center is in San Diego, but you have a customer in Taiwan and they want their Actifio to be reflective of their local time in their Taiwan office, we can set the offset so that it is accurate for them in Taiwan. So that report, even though the CDS is sitting in San Diego, because we're using the offset to make the time zone appropriate for Taiwan, it will trigger at 3 a.m. Taiwan local time. And then from there, we can set the output options. Now, this is what I was talking about. If you had somebody who you had to maybe send storage reports to, SLA violation reports, you could then set those, just those reports that you want them to see. You could set the schedule here, and then you could populate the parameters with their email addresses. So maybe you want a more granular one because day-to-day Actifio operations is your job. You care about every gigabyte, you care about every vDisk. So you're gonna get all the reports. But perhaps there's a director a little north on the org chart who doesn't really care about the individual vDisks. They just wanna know that you're using enough to achieve value, but not so many to have problems. Same with storage. You're right in that kind of 80% sweet spot. You're not throwing money out the window by leaving it 50% full, and you're not causing problems by keeping it stuffed to 95%. And maybe the folks who care about that don't really care about each vDisk. They don't really care about each gigabyte. They just want to make sure that the numbers are within spec. Everything is green, so to say. No warnings, nothing alerting going on. You could set up some of these more high-level reports that talk about overall capacity consumption, overall job health. Now, when I say job health, I'm talking about SLA violations. Maybe the job ran, but it didn't run quick enough, and it didn't meet your data protection requirements for your business needs. Even though the job ran, we still need to know that it didn't run at the right time to fill our business needs. And so this is the scheduling portion here that I'm really kind of ringing out is a great place to get yourself all of the very granular information you might want. Once you've moved on to a steady state, you can kind of back off a little bit, just show me these overall reports, just show me that one report a day. And then we can take some of the more high-level reports. And if we've got to send those out to a management team, or we've just got to file it so we can look at how much we had consumed on what day to make sure we're getting every dollar's worth of value out of our disk. We could email this to whoever we want. We could just email this off to SolarWinds, have SolarWinds trap the mail, and then in 30 days, if we have a question, we can go back and take a look. Now, you could always go back in Report Manager and rerun that report for 30 days earlier as well. But we'll get a little bit more into things like SolarWinds and ServiceNow shortly. So this is going to wrap up our portion on just Report Manager. We do have some other things we need to talk about for daily administration, but as promised, we do have some more in-depth resources. Here's this slide deck. All of these links are interactive. You will all receive a copy of this exact slide deck that you're looking at right now. And at the end of every chapter, when I show you a section like this, need additional information on the topic we just discussed, all of these links are interactive. So when you receive the deck, as you go through it and review it, maybe you want to check some notes that you made. If you want to do a little bit more deep dive into some of the things that we're touching on today, all of these resources will be provided, whether they be a video or a knowledge base article or a document. I will have all of those linked for you at the end of the section, so you can then do your deep dive at your leisure. So for Report Manager, again, we've got a great webinar that was done by Paul Martel a few weeks ago. And you can find that on our YouTube channel. You can either follow the link directly or head over to youtube.com, Actifio Enablement Team, and you'll find everything there. So the next thing we're going to look at on a daily basis is alerting. Now you can monitor all kinds of stuff. We've got a great open API. I'm not going to get too much into that now because I'm going to cover it in more detail in a few minutes here. But just to stay kind of high level on what we do, and then we'll go into some of the more specific details about how we do those things. So you can obviously monitor in the UI, the desktop app, the thing that I have been telling you to get away from for the last 20 minutes. You can monitor an AGM, much better solution, monitor all of your clusters from one point. You can also send event notifications by email. Now, this isn't any sort of weird trap relay. You don't have to set up any sort of crazy infrastructure. All this does is say if there's an alert, email these people. So if you have a failed job, if you want to receive an email, if you fail a job, we can do that. If Every time you run a GC or a sweep, maybe you are the storage admin and you don't really care about what's on the disk, you just care about how much is on the disk. You can have an email set up, so every time your GC and sweep runs, that event triggers an email to your storage admins. So they can say, okay, well, we're as unconsumed as we're gonna be, we just finished a sweep, this is as good as it gets until next month, let's see what we've got. And then we can start leveraging some of that storage tracking, the trend lines. You always, as a kind of a side note, you always want to look at that trend after a sweep. If you try to do, or if you look at Report Manager trying to do the math in the middle of a sweep, you're not going to get a real accurate number. You'll find about a 20-25% variance if we're doing the math in the middle of a GC or a sweep. Once that GC or sweep has stopped, that 20-25% variance comes down to, it's single digits. It's about 3 to 5%. And what do I mean by that? So what I was talking about, when you look at where the trend line intersects the capacity line to know pretty well right down to kind of the week, second week of December, we're going to run out of disk. If you look at that line while GC is running, that number could be about 25% off. So not that big of a deal. Maybe, you know, we're talking about less than a week worth of difference here. And so when we're talking about keeping a production data service environment online, we're not buying our hard drives a week before, we're buying them 90 days before. So even that little bit of variance, it's not really going to impact the way that you use the Actifio, the way you plan for it. But if you did look at it during a GC and then you looked at it the next day when the GC was over and you saw two different numbers, I wanted to explain to you why that is. So back to alerting. Sorry, I went down the rabbit hole a little bit there. The last thing we can do is proper event notifications. They're the kind that people are generally more used to. Now, these are our traditional SNMP traps. For this, we're going to want a relay. We're going to want a trap receiver. We could also take something like a SolarWinds, a Fixomatic, Ansible, Jenkins, really anything that'll listen to an API call or a trap, we can stick on the other end of that. Now, for the purposes of this webinar, we're just going to stick with monitoring tools that will tell us about what went on. I do, however, want to mention to you that things like ServiceNow that have automation built in, if you know that sometimes maybe you're always on SQL, we'll say a DAG environment, and sometimes you're switching IPs, and you know if that job fails, it's probably because we're using the wrong IP, because we know that we're switching them and we've not necessarily discovered under both IP addresses. If you're using something like ServiceNow, you can actually use our API to fix the job parameters. That means replace the IP address with the one that you have it at now after the flip and automatically rerun that job. That's a whole nother webinar, and that'll be a great one. I hope you sign up for it. But yeah, you can, in addition to all of this monitoring that we can do with all of these third-party applications, we can actually also bring in some automation, which again is fascinating, but unfortunately a bit beyond the scope of this particular webinar. And so to do a little more of a deep dive here, now here is the UI. And I'm showing you this just to kind of reinforce that unification of reporting. The messaging is always going to be the same. So the email traps that you get, not traps, the emails that you get are going to use the same verbiage that the UI uses. The alerts that are collected by, your third-party applications, your SolarWinds, your ServiceNow, those are also going to see the exact same error codes. So the verbiage right down to the letter is going to be the same no matter where you see it, whether you see it in Report Manager under that daily violation summary, whether you see it in our UI, whether it's a direct email, or whether it is a trap that's issued, we're going to use the same wording in all four places. And again, use that wording, copy and paste it right into our federated search. And about 95% of the time, you're going to get a document, or you're going to get a KB, or a video, or maybe all three, which are going to give you some more information on what that problem is and how to fix it. Now, some of the more interesting things, we'll start at the top here. Again, this is the same events that you're going to see in the UI will be sent via the SNMP traps or alert emails, and you can configure the severity. So maybe you've just got a warning. Maybe you've got a long-running job, or maybe your data set for that application has outgrown the staging disk. We need to resize the staging disk. And as some of us already know, if we resize the staging disk, we're no longer running an incremental. We need to run one full into that new staging disk. Now, maybe you don't care about that. Maybe everybody on your team doesn't care about that long-running job, but maybe one person does. You can actually set this alerting by granularity, by either alert, by warning, or just by event. Not even a bad thing. It's just an event. Something happened. Tell me every time something happens. We can set the granularity per recipient. So we could maybe have a team lead who just gets kind of an overall environmental summary. And maybe we've got our sysadmins that are in charge of our different sites. They're getting SLA violation reports. We've got our actual storage admins, our actual SAN engineers, and they're getting all the capacity. Maybe they want every single event, which may be useful. If a path goes offline, if it's because of multipathing, that's an adherence to an established rule. So that's not going to be an alert because things are doing what they were asked to do. A path came under contention. We found another path to the disk. That's going to be an event. If you're a storage admin, maybe you want to know that. Maybe you see that one link is always under contention. And so we don't really have multipath. We have two paths, but one's always busy. So we really are only getting use of one path. If I'm a storage admin, I want to know that. And you can make that information available to that person in the storage admin role without sending it to the whole world. So you can really just dial it in by kind of your high-level accounting, your team-based, this team is in charge of physical disks, so they're going to get the storage stuff. This team over here is in charge of data protection, so they're going to get all the SLA violation reports. And really, it's so configurable. However your organization is set up, and however these people watch this, those people watch that, these other people watch this third thing. You can really just break it down however you want and just deliver exactly what that team needs to them without giving them any more or any less, but then maintaining that availability to the full set of information in case some more thorough investigation needs to be done. Now, one of the first place you want to look when you come in the morning for, we'll just say ugly stuff, bad stuff, a disk going online, a node failing over, that's going to be your trap receiver. So you'll get a failed job. Hey, I couldn't run this job because the node had failed over. Well, of course you couldn't run it. You can't run a job on a failed over node. But you might not really want to look through your failed jobs report to know that you had a failover. That should be something that's really right in your face. That should be the first thing you see. You shouldn't have to go looking for it. So if we look at our receiver, all of these remember I said we could set granularity? We can set a single receiver that only looks at severe, only shows me RAID sets that have degraded, disks that have reported that they are not in good health, paths going down, network timeouts that were unrecoverable. We can very easily set this alerting mechanism to just send all of those type of really mission critical errors to a single repository that we can check every day. And then maybe the events we were talking about, multipath was enacted because this path came under contention. We can still run that, but let's send that to a different receiver. We don't want that to muddy the waters. We definitely want a single point where we can see hardware failures. We can see the network go down. We can see anything that's going to cause some sort of mission critical issue to our data protection or data service environment. Now, if you need more information on Actifio alerting, here's everything we've got here. We've got a great documentation video, which is actually going to show you how to get through the docs. We do have all of our events and alerting covered in a single document. However, I find that that's very well supplemented by our CLI doc. So I wanted to give you the link to the actual documentation video. It's a video called Docs Served 3 Ways. There's 3 different places every Actifio user can get access to our documents. And this details all 3. And it covers different use cases. If you're at your desk and you're just doing some research, we can just go online. We can go to docs.actifio.com. We can peruse to our heart's content and consume all day. If we have a data center that is, we'll say a dark site, we're not allowed to run the internet in there. As a matter of fact, we can't even have our laptops. We could download that PDF to a safe tablet. We could download it to a safe phone. We could download it to one of the data center's laptops that is permitted in the data center. Now, these can all be found again at docs.actifio.com. They can be found in your portal account at now.actifio.com. And we've also got a third video that shows you just kind of different ways you can download them, export them, send them around, make them available while you're offline. And we've also got a great document on configuring Actifio event alerting. Now, this is going to be all the critical information that your automation teams are going to need. So if you've got a group of real savvy Python coders and they're running your ServiceNow environment, all of the different event IDs that your automation teams are going to need is going to be in the configuring Actifio event alerting document. Now, if you don't have this great infrastructure, you don't have this brilliant team of Python coders who are doing all this automation and monitoring in the background, you can still get all of this information sent to you. It doesn't have to be through a trap relay. Again, as I mentioned earlier, you can just have these events emailed to you, and you can set the granularity. So if you have a switch that goes down in the middle of the night and one of our appliances can't talk to anything, you could just set it to email me when critical or severe events happen. And then you'll just get an email alert that that's gone on. And this is a great stopgap during implementation. Well, maybe you don't have your relay set up yet. And as we're kind of stitching the Actifio through an environment, generally there are virtualization teams that we need to talk to, network teams, storage teams, and sometimes it takes a little bit to get everybody orchestrated. So if you need to get that level of reporting in place before all the internal infrastructure is in place, we can just use the very kind of basic mail me if something critical happens, while we're then going in and getting our trap receivers set up. And again, there's more information on this on our YouTube channel. Now we'll get into some of the API and CLI options. And this is the part where we'll get a little bit more into some of this third-party software that you can use to just really make this a piece of cake. So we have Sarge reports. And that is the simple Actifio report generator. I did do a webinar on this a couple weeks back. You don't necessarily need the whole webinar. So I've just really pulled out the 3 that I like the most. And again, this is all of the information that we're going to get here, with the exception of the output from Report Health, we can find in Report Manager. As a matter of fact, a lot of the stuff that I'm going to show you today, we can just get out of Report Manager. And I'm showing you multiple different ways to get it because I want you to have options. I want you to be able to do what works best for you in your deployment, in your environment, for your use case. And I also want to show you different things that you can bring in at different points of the life cycle. So maybe you don't have a trap relay set up yet. Maybe you just need to depend on email. I mean, you can also get everything that you got in email out of Report Manager as well. So we've really put a lot of work into making sure that all of this information that you need to be successful on a daily basis is available in a ton of different venues. It can either be pulled out of the API, we can put it in a nice PDF for you, whatever way you're going to actually be able to leverage that information. Because if you can't leverage it, it doesn't have any value, which is one of the reasons we provide it in so many different flavors. So if a CSV is what works best for you, we can do that. If a PDF is what works best for you, we've got Report Manager. If just a text scraper, third-party monitoring software works, we can do that via traps, we can do that via email, we can do that via API. Now, we also have some built-in tools. And these, again, are the Sarge reports. There's a ton of them. The 3 I like the most, and there's one in particular that I would actually suggest you run on a daily basis. The one I suggest you run on a daily basis is Report Health. Report Health, as we can see here, it's on the left-hand side of the screen, is going to give you the host name, the version, scheduler use. Now, by that, I mean, is the scheduler turned on or turned off? That's critical. It'll tell you about SLA violations. It'll tell you about all your failed snaps. Again, important, data protection, absolutely tantamount to being successful here. It'll also give you MDisk and VDisk health and VDisk count. And now, I've spent a good portion of the last hour saying, let's not log into every cluster. You don't want to log into 50 CDSs. That's not how you do it in 10 minutes a day. If we have to log in all 50, we're spending hours. And if we're spending hours, that's time. Time is money. We want to save both. We want to save time. We want to save money, which means we don't want to spend hours. We want to spend minutes. And so we can actually call these remotely. I'm not going to get into the construction of a remote SSH call. You will get this. This is part of the deck. I'm sure many of you could write your own remote calls, but the key is we don't want to go to every one. So we can put it in a loop. If we have 50 CDSs, we can run that report health on every single CDS via a single script. Could be Bash, could be PowerShell, could be Python, could be Ruby, C++, C#, C flat, whatever you're comfortable with. We make this information available to you either via our plain text CLI, where we're going to use this report health command. We've got it in our traps. We've got it in our API. There's tons and tons of different ways to pull this information out and aggregate multiple clusters in a single action. And again, I don't really want to walk through how to build a loop. I'm sure most of you know how to build a basic loop in Linux or PowerShell. If you don't, again, these slides are going to stay a part of the deck. You can kind of use that as a framework to build your own off of. Now we're going to get a little bit more into the API use and some of the third-party monitoring. I've recently gotten into some projects and we've found that we can do some really amazing things with some of this third-party software. We do have an open REST API for every CDS and every SKY. So long as you're not planning to develop your own software or develop your own, we'll just cut to the choice. As long as you're not going to develop a revenue stream based on our software leveraging our API, you can just have it. Open up a support ticket, let our folks in our support team, our customer success engineers know, hey, I'd like to use your API. They'll issue you a key. They'll then file it into your account so that you can then go into the portal and recall your key if you wrote it down wrong or if you have another user. You say, just go into the portal. The key's right there. Do whatever you want with it. These keys have admin level access. So all of the command line stuff that we've talked about in the past couple months in these webinars, as well as everything we talked about today, is all accessible via the API. The API integrates seamlessly, absolutely seamlessly with SolarWinds and ServiceNow. I have extensive hands-on experience with this. You can actually, if you're a little bit clever and you understand, sometimes these jobs fail because of these three clearly identifiable things. You can actually build automation into SolarWinds and ServiceNow to then try the job 3 different ways with those 3 different parameters set to true or false, depending, until the job finally runs successfully. You can even change connector options. So if you need a full ingest, if you know that maybe some disk sets got reshuffled and an incremental is going to fail, or there's a potential for an incremental to fail, we can then, via automation of this third-party software, tell it, shut off the change block tracking. Give me a full ingest. Once the full ingest is complete, turn change block tracking back on, and then turn the regular schedule back on. So if we know that jobs will run successfully, if we can account for maybe 2 or 3 different situations, we can actually use all of this monitoring that we've been talking about for the last hour to feed an automation process, to automatically fix these jobs, to automatically run them again. And again, this is how we save time. This is how we save money. We don't go in and say, okay, well, we're going to try this and see if it works. We're going to try that and we're going to see if it works. Let's just do some automation. Let's try the job 3 different ways. And let's do that in a way that we don't have to touch it at all. And we'll just let this third-party software, as well as the Actifio API backend, work cooperatively together to try to run the job in these different ways until it's successful. And then once it's done, we can either have it, this weird job that we're going to try different things on. When it's done, email me, no problem. Or if you just want it, as long as you complete, as long as you're not on my report failed jobs list, as long as I don't see that host in that app on the SLA violation summary, I'm happy. Then good, we'll just try it a couple different ways. And if it goes, it goes. If not, then it shows up in one of the reports that we showed earlier. But the important part is our API is very, very full featured. And as many of you know, we have dial home, so I can actually see how much of the API is being used. And it's a terribly small portion compared to what it's capable of. So if you do have anybody in your organization, maybe that's you, maybe it's the person down the hall who has any sort of expertise with APIs, with SolarWinds, with Veritas, with Logic Monitor, maybe engage them on this, because you can do an awful lot of automation and some just great reporting. If you're 100% in on SolarWinds, you have an environment monitoring team and their only job is to make sure that your hardware is healthy, you can get everything that I talked about from Report Manager. You don't have to use it. I would suggest that you do, but I don't want to discount the fact that there's a ton of people out there who know more about SolarWinds than I do. If you really are bought in and all you want to use is SolarWinds, everything I showed you today can all be retrieved in SolarWinds, in ServiceNow, in Fixomatic. If you're clever, you could just write your own scripts and pull all this information out. And that's really kind of goes to the point that we know you need this information, but everybody maybe wants a little bit differently. Your VP of digital infrastructure maybe just wants a PDF that shows which clusters are consumed at what level and just make sure everything's okay. Whereas your storage engineer is actually going to want to know, hey, we're using 10% more vDisks than usual. I need to get my hands around this. Is this a trend? Do we need to expand? Is this a temporary thing? Did we onboard new stuff? And depending on who you are, you can detail and you can tune the information that you get out of the Actifio in an automated way that's delivered to you every day. You can really tailor it to exactly what that person's role is to give them exactly what they need in 2 or 3 pages. And honestly, if you spent 10 minutes on it, you probably spent twice as long as you needed to. Now, if you aren't leveraging some of this sorting, some of this more granular segregation of data, then yeah, it's going to take some time because you have to learn what's important. You have to learn how to get it. Hopefully after this webinar today, you understand a little bit better about what's really important beyond the apps, beyond the bits and bytes and all the marketing and all the fancy language, what really matters. How am I going to save time? I don't want a marketing tagline. I want a process. How am I going to save money? Again, I don't want to hear your happy messaging. I want a process. I want something empirical that I can put in my hand. I can measure it. And with all the different ways that we can provide you this information, either graphically, in a CSV, in a text file, we can give that to you. And when I look at the usage, I can see that it's not really been widely adopted or implemented. So we really wanted to kind of showcase some of these things today. Again, I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, I just showed you all these different things you can do with the Report Manager. You can tell almost right down to the day, on this month of this year, I'm going to run out of storage. 40% of our users don't have access to that information. And I think that's an awful, awful shame. So if you don't have Report Manager in, or maybe you installed it and you just kind of forgot about it, because our professional services folks are real good about really, even if you don't want it, they'll install it for you just so you can go back to it later. If that's you, this is the time where you go back to it later. There's so much there that we can give you to make your day with Actifio a much shorter, much better, much more productive day if you know how to leverage these resources that we've made available. Now we'll get a little bit more into the API. Now there's a full webinar on this as well. Unfortunately, to administrate Actifio in 10 minutes a day, there's about 6 hours worth of webinars that you need to be familiar with, which I think is fair. Actifio serves all the data in your environment. We touch every bit, every byte, every app, every disk, every gigabit, we're in there. And so I don't think it's unreasonable that we are probably going to want to spend a couple hours. However, I was thinking about this webinar and what we were presenting last night, and I think one of the real points of value in what we're reviewing today and some of the information we're talking about is if you were to hire a new person tomorrow, you could give them this slide deck. They could take those resource pages at the end of every section. They could take the words that you're seeing on the screen right now, and within a week, they could actually get your Actifio maintained. They might not know how to create SLAs, how to do some of the fancy stuff that we've talked about over the last couple of months in these webinars. But just as far as holding the line, making sure that things are okay, the board is green, so to speak, you could do that with this deck in a couple days of study. And I've gone down the rabbit hole again, so let me circle back into to the API. So the API it's a standard API. It's an API just like any other API that you've used. However, we offer API access to things that did not have API access before Actifio got their hands on them. Now, what we've actually done is we've taken one of our services that we use to talk to all this stuff, and we're actually using that to send internal calls via the API. So you make an API call, we translate that to Actifio language, to actual Actifio command, and we issue that under the covers. So if you kind of have some preconceived notions about what APIs can do and what they cannot do, I would ask you to reserve those for a moment. Take a look at ours, because we're doing things with an API, specifically with things that have never had APIs before. And if you were to buy it off the shelf today, it will not have an API. It only has an API if you have it attached to an Actifio environment. Really take a look, be a little creative, because I guess there's a lot there that nobody else does. We're the only people doing it. We're the first ones doing it. It's great, and we want to make it available to you. So again, here in my example, we can use all of our UDS commands, UDS info, UDS task. We can use all of our SVC commands. Not quite so popular. Everybody should be familiar with UDS commands. If you're not familiar with UDS commands, I'm going to continue to be a shill for our old webinars and tell you to go check out our CLI webinar. SVC commands are not going to be relevant so much with Sky. So if you really just kind of focus on the UDS commands for your API integration, that's going to take care of 95% of what you need as far as getting the information out in an automated fashion so you can look at it while you're drinking your morning coffee and have a great idea of everything that's going on, not just understand what's going on right now today, but know what's going to happen in 90 days before you finish that cup of coffee in the morning. And again, I don't want to get into the full construction of an API call because there are so many different ways to make an API call. Again, Python, Ruby, C#, C++, Bash. Because there's so many different flavors, I'll leave this slide in. You can kind of use it as an example. But there are so many different flavors. I really just kind of want to stick it as a generic example. And as Paul mentioned, there is going to be a section in the end for feedback. If you really wanted a deep dive on the API, leave that in the feedback. We'll put together a webinar session for you. So if you need more information, we're back to the resource slide. We've got a great video on the Sarge reporting webinar. Now that's going to be our report health, report pools. The Actifio CLI webinar, that's going to be all these UDS commands, and this is going to be all of the command line based information that you're going to want to leverage our API for either native or third-party monitoring, or as we discussed a little bit, automation, which is excellent. And we've got loads of documents. We've got the Sarge document, the API and CLI. With those two documents, you can do anything you want with our API. You can actually invoke API commands on hosts and hardware that have never had API access before you attach them to our solution. And again, you can always head over to our YouTube channel where we've got all of this. We've got loads of great videos on SQL, app recovery, Oracle, RAC, ASM rebalance, and switch, loads of great stuff. And again, all of these links are interactive. So when you get the slide deck, all you've got to do is click. It'll bring you exactly where you need to be. Folks, thank you again for joining us for our presentation of Actifio Administration in just 10 minutes a day.
And again, I'd like to thank you, David, for today's presentation.
Thank you, Paul, and thanks everybody for joining. I'm starting to run out of ideas for webinars. So you let me know what you want, and we'll go ahead and we'll take the most popular ideas, we'll get those developed, and we'll get those delivered to you. So thanks again, everybody, and have a good day. Thank you for joining us for another YouTube Tech Tip video. If you like the content you're seeing on this channel, please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you will be alerted to any future content.